Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lark Park. I'm the director of the California Education Learning Lab. I wanted to welcome you all to the final event of Learning Lab's Equity Conversation Series, the Syllabus as an Equity Practice. We've had an unprecedented number of registrants to today's event, and I'm really thrilled that there's been such a strong interest in the topic of racial and gender equity in higher education. But it's also really exciting just to see the level of specific interest in a practical discussion of what role the syllabus can play in advancing racial equity. Here to lead us through the focus on the syllabus is Dr. Estella Bensimon, a national leader on racial equity in higher education. Estella is the founding director of the Center for Urban Education at USC. She's an elected member of the National Academy of Education and co-author of the recently published book, From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, Expanding Practitioner Knowledge for Racial Justice in Higher Education. She's also an advisor to the Learning Lab. And for those of you who joined us for the first event in our series, The Meaning of Racial Equity, Estella was our first speaker, and we're grateful that she's come back to continue the focus on racial equity as we close out this series. Just a word about the format today. We'll be using the Q&A to field questions from the audience. You don't have to wait until the end to type in your question to Estella, but we do suggest that you upvote questions with the thumbs up so we know what questions you all have in common. We do have a portion of the hour devoted to the Q&A closer to the end, but if Rob Charette, Learning Lab's Program Development Officer, who is monitoring the questions, sees a good way to weave a question in during Estella's talk, he has the go sign to interject. At the very end of the hour, we'll launch a 2-question poll, so please stick around then, until then if you can. And Estella, thank you so much for being here. I think our audience is eager to hear from you, so I will just hand it over to you.
Thank you, Lark, for the introduction, and hello to everyone. I am sorry that I'm not able to see you, but I hope that we will still have a good interaction around the syllabus as an instrument for racial equity. Let me just, many of you may not know who I am or heard about my work. So I thought I would start out with just a brief introduction about how I came to focus on racial equity. I founded the Center for Urban Education in around 1999, 2000. And at the time, everyone in higher education was speaking about diversity and the importance of diversity. And being here at USC in the Los Angeles metropolitan area, where we are surrounded by essentially Hispanic serving Cal State University campuses, as well as community colleges, for me, the issue was not about diversity. It was really about accountability to the students who made up the diversity that we so celebrated. And so what I thought was most of these campuses have passed stage 1 of diversity. So now they need to, think about racial equity in educational outcomes. And in part, I think we are all influenced by our background and our experiences. So, so being a product of the 1960s civil rights movement, having participated in many demonstrations while I was a college student, in part, my focus on racial equity is an attempt to regain the racial justice aims of those movements. So I just wanted to give you that introduction just so that it was clear, the context for the work that I do. So, oops, okay, that doesn't work. I don't know why. Let me just, so let me start out with, how do we typically understand the problem of racial, ethnic, educational inequities? And here I'm talking about the inequities that are experienced by African American, Latinx, Indigenous students, Pacific Islanders. And one thing I want to make clear in this talk is that a lot of times we do a lot of data gazing, and we lament the fact that there are inequities. So one of the things that I try to do is to reframe the problem, rather than it's the students who are having these performance gaps. It's, for me, it's the institutions as well as we as faculty, that somehow our practices are failing these students, and that's why we have these inequities. Now, the way that we typically understand uh, student success, and we make sense of those data, is that we might think that the students are not motivated, because most of our theories of student success focus on the individual student. That they're not committed to finishing or investing their time into their courses, that they lack the discipline to be self-directed and self-regulated, and which goes along with student effort. So for those of you in the audience who have read some of the literature on student success, I think that this will be familiar to you. The surveys that we give on campuses, such as surveys on student engagement, are all informed by this paradigm of student success, which is highly individualistic. And what happens is that when we see those inequities in graduation outcomes, in course outcomes, this paradigm, which is it functions below our consciousness, then gives us the tendency to want to fix students. And what I'm going to suggest today is that we need to fix ourselves and our institutions. So what I am suggesting is, what if we think about student success differently? We think of, yes, student effort matters, but so does practitioner effort, and practitioner care, and practitioner sense of responsibility to the students, particularly those students who we might be failing, and also institutional commitment. So this is the way that I want to frame student success. It's refocusing on the practitioner and institutions. And in terms of equity, racial equity, we need to, as practitioners, become aware of our own racial identity. And I mean white as well. I don't mean just, black and black and brown, but that faculty, and the faculty are predominantly white. So it is important to think about, how does my racial identity as a white male or a white woman impact students who are African American, Latinx, what have their experiences been in classrooms? So that is one of the things that we need to think about. We need to be aware of racialized patterns in our classrooms. So for instance, it's important to notice how many of the students in this classroom of 20 students, let's say, I know some of you may have much bigger, how many of them are African American or Latinx, and what is their participation in my class? We need to be aware of the racial consequences of everyday actions that we take. Sometimes we do things in classrooms that do have racial consequences, even though they might have been well-intended. Like, working in, breaking into groups to do activities and being conscious of how racially minoritized students are being included or excluded. And finally, this one is the most important, is that all of us have a great deal of power as faculty members, also as staff, as leaders, and we make choices on whose behalf we use our power. And what I would like to say is that part of the racial equity work is for us to use our networks, our knowledge, our authority, on behalf of students who need it the most, rather than on students who have always had opportunities. And if you're curious as to what, so I'll just give a quick example. As a faculty member, I teach PhD students. I have probably a bigger share of racially minoritized PhD students than other faculty. And I have lots of networks nationally, and I make sure that I use that to help my racially Latinos, Black students get jobs, get research assistantships, be able to learn how to apply for a Spencer Fellowship. That's what I mean by practitioner agency to produce racial equity. So I want to also, everybody's talking about equity nowadays, particularly since the racial reckoning over the last 10 months. And but a lot of times we talk about equity without without a strong foundation, whether theoretically and also politically. So I feel that we must define equity as racial justice. And the way that, that I see it is that equity is about corrective justice. For the educational debt that is owed, and this debt, I need to acknowledge Gloria Ladson Billings for that. It's that for hundreds of years we have practiced discriminatory practices, enslavement, colonization. So there is a debt that is owed to racially minoritized populations. And we also, that part of that debt is that many of the students who come to our colleges come from schools that have been under-resourced and where they're highly segregated, and where the ratio, for instance, of counselors to students may be 1 to 1,000. I also think of equity as an anti-racist project and particularly right now, the racial reckoning and all of the other insurrections that we have witnessed in the Capitol, it is particularly important to think about the curriculum and our teaching in terms of an anti-racist project. And finally, it's about decentering whiteness. Our institutions of higher education were founded predominantly for white students. And even though they are no longer that way, many of the practices that continue and the traditions tend to center whiteness. And in some ways, what I'm going to speak about today, the syllabus, is about decentering whiteness in the syllabus. I have a clicker that I thought would work, but it stopped working. So you may have noticed that I used the term racially minoritized. And some of you may be wondering, why am I saying that? And so this is an expression that comes from critical theorists. And it's to demonstrate that groups that we refer to as minorities did not become minorities by their own volition. They were made into minorities. They were minoritized. And even though, for instance, here in California, where Latinx are substantial and often in some campuses, they might be the majority, they're still seen as a minority and they're minoritized. So the minoritized is to call, language is very important, and is to use language as a way of signaling how groups come into their status. So I think of faculty as first-generation equity practitioners. So rather than thinking about first-generation students, which we often talk about, and we speak about how they have not been taught how to navigate college, I'm going to suggest that faculty have not been taught how to navigate classrooms that are now racially diverse. we just have not been taught that, including myself. And here's the title of an article that I wrote with James Gray, a math instructor at the Community College of Aurora in Colorado. And actually the term first generation equity practitioner was coined by him during a time that I was working on a project in Colorado. So, so the majority of our faculty fall into that status of first generation equity practitioner. And so I'm going to use that as a way of talking about the syllabus and what Professor John, as a first generation equity practitioner, needs to learn to become equity minded. And I'll talk about what equity minded means. So much of the faculty in our institutions, they have degrees from top research universities. Often they are upper middle class. They have, had college educated parents. And in this case, Professor John Doe, he is, and this is actually a true representation of someone that I interviewed for an NSF project. He may be in a college, in a university that has a high proportion of what we think about first generation, low income, and in this case, Mexican American students. So he needs to learn how to create the success of those students, which are different from what he may have been used to. This is going to drive me crazy. Okay, so when I started this work, so I didn't tell you this. So before, I'm not a typical academic. I became an academic after 10 years of doing community organizing work. So in community organizing work, it's typically it's done through action research. And the reason why one does action research is because you cannot tell people to change themselves. They have to change themselves on their own. And the way that they do that is by developing new understandings, new practices. And typically that happens through what we call productive activities. So when I move over to the syllabus, that's what I'm going to talk about, how the syllabus review can become a participatory action research among colleagues. And the next thing, and you probably see here equity scorecard. That's something that I created when I started the center, and it's a tool. And the syllabus review is part of the equity scorecard tools. But the way that we decided to focus on action research is because racial inequality often has been defined as a problem of students, right? Like that student success paradigm that I showed. In contrast, the way that I think of it is inspired by the philosopher Dewey, and is to say, okay, we see that in this calculus class, 20% of the students are African American, but only 10% of them, let's say, earned an A. Why is that? So what I'm saying is we don't know why. It's what Dewey called an indeterminate situation. And in order to be able to solve an indeterminate situation, we have to ask why, and we have to engage in inquiry. And so I believe that in higher education, because of the types of organizations that we are, that inquiry is probably one of the most powerful ways to bring about change, not only in individuals, but also in our institutional structures and policies. So this notion of inquiry is as a form of change, of organizational change or individual change, is influenced by cultural historical activity theory. And I'm going to just quickly show you this and talk about where the syllabus falls. But what you see here is a triangle, which is an activity, is called an activity setting. And obviously I'm going to simplify a lot of complex ideas. But what you have here in this activity setting is you have subjects, people, faculty members. In this case, I put math faculty, STEM faculty, deans, a pathways team. So these subjects, the objective here, taking Professor John as our example, is for them to become equity-minded. But they're not going to become equity-minded just by listening to me right now. They're going to need artifacts, tools to be able to learn to become equity-minded. The syllabus is one of those artifacts that can mediate equity-mindedness. Now, one other thing that I want to point out in this activity setting is that you will see division of labor here. This is really important because what happens often in an activity setting like this is that African Americans or Latinos, I mean, this has happened to me a lot, where I'm the only one. And it's always, then it falls on me to call out, well, what about race? What about this microaggressions? So part of this activity setting is that others have to take up that labor of bringing up how racialization is being, for instance, covered up by data that are not disaggregated by race and ethnicity. And there are also rules in this activity setting. So I would say one of the rules, for instance, if we're using data, is that it always has to be disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So, so this is the foundation for the work that leads to the syllabus review. Let me check the time. Okay, we're fine. So I said that in order to develop equity-mindedness, you need tools. And that's what the Center for Urban Education did for 20 years. I say did because on on June 1st, I merged the center with the USC Race and Equity Center. But all of these tools, if you're interested, are available at on a microsite, and you can see the address there. And they're free, and they're open, and they're available to you. And you can try them out. So syllabi are one of many artifacts that communicate classroom culture. It's how we teach, it's how the class is physically organized, the kinds of assignments we give. So the message that I'm giving you right now is, if you are a faculty member, is to think about all of the artifacts that you use to teach. Now you're using your computer also, probably. And then begin to think how those artifacts reflect a racial justice perspective. And it can be very illuminating when we do that. So let's go on to the syllabus review. Okay, so one of the things that we often say to students is it's on the syllabus, right? But then we don't always think about what might be on the syllabus. So this is actually an image from a syllabus. It was from a community college syllabus. It was from a math class. Now, the cartoon that says, no, 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 wrong again, that's something we put in. What this syllabus had was to calculate your course average. Here is the formula. Now, this is in a developmental math course. And I mean, it's totally ridiculous. And but it's on the syllabus. And so students were supposed to figure out what this formula meant in order to calculate how they were doing. And the point of this, even though it might be exaggerated, even though it's true, is that oftentimes we have things in our syllabi that can be completely intimidating. We often do things that, I still remember my first year in college, going to a class on earth science. And the first thing that the faculty member did was hand out a map of the United States that was, empty. The states were not named. And we had to put in the names of the states. Now, I had not been in the United States for very long. I saw that and I panicked. And I tell you, to this day, I hated that class. I hated that instructor. So, so the messages that we convey by our actions can have long-term effects for students. So this is the syllabus review tool, which I think might be available to you either now or later today. We developed it. It's based on research, and it actually takes you through the steps of reviewing your syllabus. Okay, so the research shows that language in syllabi can shape students' impressions of instructors, and to determine whether they're going to enjoy this class or whether they feel comfortable. So the language in the syllabus, if it's friendly, they will view instructors as warm. And if the language is, about rules and all the ways in which you can fail the course, it can be very discouraging. And, syllabi, if you take a look, if you go back or if you collect the syllabi for your department, often they are very rules oriented. Sometimes rules are created based on one incident that happened in one class in order to avert it from ever happening again. So there was one syllabus that I looked at, which actually said, do not comb your hair in class, do not comb each other's hairs, or do any other kind of, I can't remember, beauty related, actions in the classroom. Now, why would you put that in a syllabus? It was kind of insulting. So, okay.
Estella.
Yes.
Sorry,
yes.
I found an opportunity to interject here just momentarily, because someone was asking if you could go back to the slide with the equation and the syllabus. Or the map, and asking to fill in. Just talk a little bit more about why that's problematic.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right, let's see. So why is that problematic? Well, maybe I wonder if there's somebody in the audience that would like to say why they think it's problematic. And if there is, maybe that person can they just speak up, or can they put it in the chat, Rob?
Yeah, that might be a little difficult for them to respond in that way. Okay. So yeah.
So and also the person who asked this question might also want to, write down in the question and answer why, do they not, is it that they're not sure why this is intimidating? Okay, why is this intimidating? This is a class. It's a developmental math education class at a community college. This means that students were put into this class because they were found to not be ready for college level math. And so given that, being able to figure this out, even though it may have been put in as a well-intended to I don't know, to model what a formula looks like, it's not friendly. It it can tap into students' anxieties. I don't know what this means.
Estella, actually, a few of our webinar participants have put in the Q&A why they think that that particular cartoon is intimidating. So I would encourage everybody to turn to some of the responses from the audience that they were able to use the Q&A to provide.
Right. Okay, so here is Marianne Irwin. The cartoon assumes that students are able to perform the calculation. Nicole Summer, it is translates to, I am a number, plus I must understand this equation before even taking the class. Exactly. So all of those are really great reasons for why this is not a best practice. So shall I go on?
Yes.
Okay. So another aspect of what's in the syllabus is being able to offer students is the resources that can make them successful. So oftentimes we complain that students don't ask for help, that students don't go to the tutoring lab, and that they just don't take advantage of all of the resources we have available for them. And then you look at syllabi, and often there is no information on all of those wonderful resources. So part of what's a good syllabus is being able to have the information upfront so that students will know where they can get support. And sometimes faculty will say, well, I don't have it in the syllabus, but I do tell them. Well, actually, research shows that it is much more effective to have explicit statements in the syllabus. So last, why is a syllabus important in terms of racial equity? In part is because the syllabus can be a way of, what we have here, full disclosure of the terms of success. It is what I will show you is to demystify sometimes the ambiguous language of the academy and to not, to avoid confusion. So like you might have in the syllabus about office hours, right? And that's a really delicate issue, office hours, because lots of students don't know what to do. Like they have to think, if I go to office hours and I ask for help and the professor tells me, well, go and read the textbook or study it. It's like, what do I do when I go to office hours? How do I have a conversation? This is what may be going on in the students' minds. And often faculty don't know how to have a conversation with students and find out about their lives. So when we created the syllabus review tool, it has six sections, and I'm going to go through each, and I am going to give examples. And all of these are in the tool. So these 6 sessions, Alicia Dowd and I wrote a book on engaging the race question. And we define in that book equity as being fairness, as being care, and as being transformation. And those 6 sections of the syllabus review tool are essentially organized according to equity as fairness, equity as care, and equity as transformation. And I hope that will become obvious when I explain each. And so you may be thinking, oh, this is a lot to absorb right now, which it is. But all of this is in that tool. It's all explained in the tool. So what I'm giving you now is like a big overview. And I'm going to use, to explain these, I'm going to actually use examples from Jennifer Ortiz. She is an English instructor at West Los Angeles Community College, who actually took our work to heart and has used it to both look at her syllabus and recreate her syllabus. So Demystify is providing students with the information that they need to successfully navigate the course. And so the way that she has translated Demystify is through a series of YouTubes like this one. Hope it works.
Hello, student. My name is Professor Ortiz, and I'm an English faculty member
okay?
at LA Trade Tech College. I'm sending you a quick video to show you on how you can book an office hours appointment with your professor. We've recently made it easier so you can actually book an appointment through your Canvas shell. Okay, so you are in your class.
So there you have it.
Select
I'm just showing you examples so you can see how this can be done in different ways. And here is another one, which has, at the time that we put this in, 1,735 views. So students are interested in this kind of stuff.
Now, paragraphs can be a part of a single assignment where I ask you to respond to a question. And paragraphs are also included in essay assignments. But right now, I want to focus on the paragraph format itself. So a paragraph has 4 major components.
So there, what she has done is created a video to explain to students the meaning of a paragraph. And so this is the ways, and this is a couple of the ways in which she demystifies how to get the work done for her course. So now I'm going to go to the next one, and I hope that this doesn't start playing again. Oh. Okay, there. So one of the things that we often have in our syllabus, because we're required to, is the information on disabilities and being able to get extra support. This is by law, and this is probably something that everyone has on their syllabus. But here is, this is because to show compliance and also to let students know about the resources on campus. But you can provide that same information in a different way. So let me just see here. So in this syllabus, which comes from LA Trade Tech College, they added to that section, this notice, sometimes asking for help is the bravest move you can make. You can't have it to go it alone. And rather than providing all of that dry legal language, it tells students, disabilities are not a reflection of who you are, but of how your brain works. And maybe eventually we won't even call them disabilities anymore, and so on. So that can make a big difference from providing that legal document and translating it into language that is friendlier, sympathetic, empathetic. So there it is. Here is another example of demystifying. This is also from Jennifer's syllabus. And I'll tell you in a minute why I'm showing it to you. But if you can see, she's telling students that, that you should think about working 2 hours outside of class for every hour spent in class. But then she goes on, this out of class work, that by studying should be studying, can be studying, reading, writing, going to tutoring or office hours, or doing homework assignments, right? But then she says, to help you manage this workload, you should use a calendar to track your responsibilities. And I can help you plan a schedule to maximize the time you have. So especially if you're very busy with work or family responsibilities. And I really love that, because in too many syllabi, what I have seen is exactly the same thing. but in a different, with a different tone. If you cannot spend 2 hours per hour of class, I recommend you drop the course. So you can see how the tone, she's providing this not as a warning, but she's providing it as support. Okay, so welcoming. Welcoming is how to make your class, like make students feel like they're valued, they're wanted, and you're excited to get to know them. So this is, okay, what she has here, if you're looking at this picture, is, I think it's from Oaxaca in Mexico. And you know how tourists go to places like Oaxaca and they take pictures of the, native people. And so this is kind of a shift, the people from Oaxaca taking photographs of the tourists.
Hello, if you're receiving this message, it is because you are registered for one of my English classes. My name is Professor Ortiz, pronouns she, her, hers, and I want to welcome you to fall semester 2020. Before we get started, I just want to say that I am so humbled by the fact that you are here today. I can't imagine what it's like to be a college student during a pandemic. It's been very difficult for all of us. And so, I hope that when things get difficult this semester, we will show each other grace.
So that's how she welcomes the students to her class, with a video that she sends out before class begins. And if you were listening to her, there, it's a way also of teaching and modeling. She mentions her pronouns as an example. She also acknowledges what difficult times we are in. Okay. Creating a partnership is to communicate to students that you will work with them and that for their success, and also is communicating, respect for students as learners, but who also come with knowledge. And one of the things that Jennifer does is she has a virtual study hall, which what it means is that she's there. It's a Zoom time, and students can log in, she's there, and they can ask her questions. And I believe this is where she also has a playlist that they put on. So here, validating. So validating is communicating belief in students, but also, also validating their experiences and their knowledge, and their, in some ways also their cultural preferences. So what you can see here is on Fridays, she has that as part of her office hours is the Friday playlist. And you can see that all of that music is music that is probably very reflective of her students' interests. And then validating, she has these other things around tutoring and so on. But the issue of the music is, I think, particularly, I think that it's something that it makes students feel like they have something in common with her. And, one of the things that's important about Jennifer, unlike Professor John, so she comes from the neighborhood of the students where she teaches. The students see themselves in her, and she sees herself in them. Professor John has had a different experience, and that's why he needs to learn these things. He may not become like Professor Ortiz, but he can learn from what she does. So finally, here, deconstructing. This is actually, so this painting that you see is by an artist who's named Johnson. And Jennifer went to New York City when we could travel, and went to to MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, and saw his exhibit. And his exhibit was organized around hope, love, and some other themes. And she reorganized her English class around the themes of his paintings. And so deconstructing is decentering whiteness as the norm. It's promoting awareness and critical examination of students' assumptions, beliefs, and privileges. And I don't know if I have an actual example of the way in which she did this. I think I have one later, but we might run out of time. Finally, representing. What she did in this case, and I'm not going to show it, is you might recognize Angela Duckworth. She wrote about grit, and grit got a lot of attention, but one aspect of grit can be damaging for racially minoritized students, in that it somewhat goes back to that individualist way of thinking about student success that I showed you at the beginning. So what she does is she provides another perspective from Bettina Love, who talks about hip hop, and she's also a teacher. And she asks students, look at both of these TED Talks and look how they apply, how you can apply a critical race lens to the concept of grit. And so that's how this is one of the ways in which she has used representing. It is 12:46, Lark, and of course, I am not done, but let me just go back. Let me go to my very last slide. I had a lot of stuff.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to English.
These are students' voices that she uses, who tell the other students what the English class is like.
Hello.
So in the syllabus review tool, if you access it, it provides you with two methods in which you can analyze your syllabus. One is like a checklist, and the other one is more of a inductive, coding. And so this is my recommendation to you in terms of how to apply this, is that you could convene a group of colleagues, a small group, bring your syllabus, your syllabi, and together apply the tool and see what you can learn. And the reason why I say maybe do it as a group is because you will be able to see each other's syllabi, something that we don't often do, and you might also learn from that. So I'll stop here and I'll go to the questions.
Thank you so much, Estella. I know that people have probably been very focused on all of the things that you've brought up in the slides, but Rob, I'll turn to you because you've been monitoring the questions. So are there any that you want to read out loud to Estella?
Sure, I'll highlight the first one, which is someone described sometimes people having difficulty understanding what centering whiteness means. And so they're wondering if you can provide an example or two of like when whiteness is centered, sometimes when we don't even know it.
Well, I think that since we're talking about syllabi, oftentimes, and here I'm thinking more of the humanities and social science, the works that are represented are typically centered on white authors, white artists, and white filmmakers, for instance. So that's one of the ways. In math and in the sciences, often what I get is that, well, math is math, science is science. I can't, it has nothing to do with this. But in fact, it does, and you can use in your math and science syllabi ways of representing mathematicians and scientists who come from racially minoritized backgrounds and have made scientific contributions. You can also show how science has been used, misused, the dangers of science in relation to race. And those are all ways, when we don't do that, we are centering whiteness. I think that the other way in which we center whiteness is by our expectations of what a good student looks like. And if they don't, if it's okay, if students, there's a famous book by bell hooks, Black Looks, and the use of Black looks as a defensive mechanism, particularly by African American, young men, and faculty will often react to that negatively, not realizing that this is a way of protecting themselves. So that's another way in which we center whiteness, is by how you're supposed, what your demeanor should be. So those are just, some examples, but basically everything in our institutions of higher education are centered on the white experience of higher education.
Great. Rob, do you want to read out the next question?
Yeah, sure. Another one that was upvoted a lot has to do with encouraging students to ask for help, specifically those who may be undocumented students. This person said, while I try to create a welcoming environment, I understand that some students may not feel safe disclosing their status to me. I don't want students who happen to be undocumented to hesitate to say, ask for an extension if explaining why they are doing so would require them to disclose their status.
Yes, I know. I'm not sure why I'm not sure why they would need to disclose their status. One of the ways so help seeking is a cultural practice, and there are many factors that play into that. So I would say that in order to encourage students to come to you, you can do things like, like what Jennifer did, that virtual, study hall. Actually, rather than waiting for students to ask you for help, is to extend yourselves to students. Maybe, one of the things that I did in my class, but, I had the luxury of a small class, was require students to have a 45-minute appointment with me at least once during the semester, solely for the purpose of getting to know them and for them to get to know me, to just have a conversation, not about class necessarily. So I think that what we need to do is to be attentive to students who may need help and be proactive about it without being, obviously there's a thin line there, not to be condescending or appear to not have faith in their abilities to be successful. I don't have always, so as professionals, Aristotle spoke about techne and phronesis. So techne is when we have a script, and phronesis is when we use our wisdom to make decisions. I would say that I think it was I'm trying to see the name. Okay, so I'm saying is we need to engage in our wisdom as professionals, and we're constantly learning to try out new things and how we communicate with students.
Rob, you want to go to the next question?
Sure. Yes, there was one that was about, at the very beginning, there was mention of breaking students into working or breakout groups and how that relates to racial demographics of students in the course and equity. Can you give an example of those groups being formed successfully and also not?
Yeah, so in one session that I spoke about that, there was an African-American chemistry professor, and he said, when I was in college, we would we would work in those groups. This is particularly true in science labs, and my peers made assumptions about me. And did not necessarily seek me out to be part of their groups until they realized that I knew what was going on in chemistry. And I think that that's what happens. When I said, you asked me about what centered in whiteness, I bet that oftentimes when students are asked to break into groups, they go with students. They might exclude students, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, racially minoritized students. And this is particularly negative if there's only a couple of those students in the classroom. If there is a critical mass in the classroom, it will not matter as much because they will get together on their own. And that's okay. That is okay. So that's what I meant by the breaking down into groups, that you have to be sensitive to the dynamics around those groups, who speaks in those groups. It's good to walk around and see that students are, and that the groups are not being dominated. This is also a gender issue, by the way. Yeah, I don't know if you saw the article about economics faculty, women who are interrupted like 3 times more than male professors when they're giving presentations.
We probably have time for 2 to 3 more quick questions. So Rob, do you want to pick out of the ones that are in the stream?
Sure. There's one about the concern of students potentially, quote unquote, taking advantage of a faculty's warmth and the way that they use warm and welcoming language in the syllabus. Can you talk about if you have any recommendations for a response to that concern?
You mean about being taken advantage of?
Yeah, it seems like that the implication is that faculty may believe that if they use warm and welcoming language, the students will take advantage of it. And this person's wondering if you can provide some recommendations about how to respond to that concern.
Yes, I see. Well, I guess in part, we are in this profession to be taken advantage of. So we are teachers, right? And so we want students to come to us and to learn. So if taking advantage means not doing the work, or I guess what I would say, if somebody said that to me, I think that what Jennifer Ortiz is doing is actually harmful, because students will take advantage of it and they won't really study. I would probably say, first of all, how do you know? How do you know that? Have you tried it? Have you had that experience with students? And so I would go there. I would also say that everything that I showed you about her syllabus and her language, the use of I, instead of speaking in a third person singular, that those are all demonstrations of creativity, of caring, and of exercising her practice with the utmost integrity. And that's what we want to strive for.
Rob, I think we have one more quick question, and Kanari has asked the question.
Yes. So the last one would be, much of the conversation seemed to be focused on the context of small classes. This person's wondering, what advice do you have for large undergraduate STEM courses that have the stigma of being extremely difficult already, or in courses where students have preconceived anxieties about their performance, such as math?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that you would need to be very focused at the first, maybe the first 3 weeks of class, to create an environment that, to the extent possible, breaks down the barriers of a big classroom like that. And also to be aware of this person is already aware of those anxieties, and to think about what are those anxieties and how can I, how can I dampen them? Those large classrooms can be very, very intimidating. I wouldn't want to be in one of them. And for sure, I'm not sure that I would ever raise my hand to speak in a group like that, because I would be so scared about, you can probably sense that I have an accent, that, people would laugh if when I speak, because I'm not speaking the way that, that makes me, quote unquote, American, that I might say the wrong thing, that the professor might make fun of me. So all of those things are real. And it's finding a way of of countering them. I'm sure that there are many who have an answer to that, about how you can create a welcoming and safe environment in a big classroom.
Estella, on that note, we're right at 1 o'clock. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I wanted to thank all the webinar participants for spending time with us. Before we let you go though, Rob is just going to launch a quick poll for you to respond to. If you could just take 30 seconds to respond to that poll, would be really helpful to us. As noted in the beginning, this is the last event in our Equity Conversation series. All 4 talks can be found on Learning Lab's YouTube channel, which you can find in our chat. We'll send everyone who registered for this webinar a link to the talk. Learning Lab is going to take a break from webinars for a while and then maybe resume them in the early summer. If you want to receive announcements about future webinars, grant opportunities, or even just ways to connect with other faculty with some of these questions, please do sign up to join the Learning Lab community through our listserv. And we always appreciate any feedback you have, how we can provide more valuable on the work that you're doing. So please feel free to send us a note at info@calearninglab.org. I just want to thank everyone again for your interest in this topic of race and gender equity. And thanks to Estella for a very valuable conversation on how we can use the syllabus to practice and promote racial and gender equity. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. And we hope to see you in the summer. Thank you.